In the 2040s, the Tantalus base stands tall on Mars, serving as a hub for a team of 8 astronauts on a 6-month mission to collect crucial samples. Today marks their final day, with just 19 hours left until the spacecraft Aurora arrives to take them back to Earth. Amidst the sprawling Martian desert, astronauts Vincent and Rebecca traverse the terrain in a rover, heading towards an excavation site. They notice a looming sandstorm and radio their colleague, Kim, urging her to return to the base for final preparations. Kim, however, ignores Vincent's request, stubbornly continuing her search for meaningful samples. Frustrated, Vincent shares his annoyance with Rebecca, venting about Kim's attitude and the tension it creates. Though he's eager to go home, he dreads the 6-month journey back. Kim eventually boards the rover, but she grumbles about the mission's lack of achievements, claiming 6 months wasn't enough time to yield anything substantial. As they drive back, they receive an urgent call from Captain Charles. The team at the base is struggling to fix their communication link with Aurora, and their assistance is needed. Meanwhile, Richard, working on repairs, manages to restore part of the system, but faces ongoing issues with the power supply due to the storm's impact. Marco, another crew member, requests a final trip to the excavation site to repair a malfunctioning gamma sensor. Though hesitant, Charles agrees, sending Marco and Richard on the task. As they depart, Kim feels irritated, believing it unfair that she was ordered back while the others were allowed to venture out again. During the trip, Richard soon realizes that Marco deceived him. Instead of fixing equipment, they're seeking something Marco calls a microscopic anomaly. Meanwhile, at the base, Vincent repairs the cooling system, noticing the Aurora's unusual flight path, describing it as erratic. In the lab, Kim investigates Marco's workstation and discovers his hidden research, revealing images of microbial borings, signs of bacterial life. Furious, she and Rebecca confront the crew, exposing Marco's attempt to keep the discovery to himself. Captain Charles orders Marco and Richard to return immediately, but Marco convinces Richard to ignore the command, blaming the bad radio signal. Upon reaching the site, Marco collects a sample, but the ground unexpectedly collapses, trapping him underground. Richard attempts to rescue Marco, but struggles due to the thick steam emerging from the collapse. Charles and Lauren arrive to help, but the situation grows dire. Lauren insists on descending into the pit, but Charles, fearing for her safety, forbids it. They agree that Lauren will stay behind to monitor the situation while Charles and Richard head back to the base to fetch proper equipment. At the base, tensions rise. Kim demands the team announce the discovery, while Richard, still reeling from Marco's accident, expresses his frustration. The crew contacts Mission Control, who authorizes them to retrieve Marco despite the risks. As preparations begin, Robert pressures Charles to reprimand Kim for her behavior, but Charles shoulders the responsibility for all crew mistakes. Charles, accompanied by Rebecca, Robert, and Vincent, sets off for the excavation site. Lauren remains at the rover to keep watch. As the storm rages, Lauren hears strange noises outside the vehicle and tries to radio Charles, but the interference blocks her message. When the team arrives at the site, they find Lauren missing. Assuming she fell into the pit, Vincent volunteers to descend. As he nears the bottom, Vincent is struck by the sight of a strange microbial organism growing on the rock face. Overcome by flashbacks of being trapped in the Aurora, Vincent panics and the team quickly pulls him to safety. Back on the surface, Robert makes a startling discovery: 2 sets of footprints leading back towards the base. The team is baffled as the figures could have easily used the rover. They radio Kim to prepare for casualties, and she speculates that if Marco's suit is damaged, he could be suffering from severe oxygen deprivation. Richard checks the tracking system and confirms 2 figures are just 50 meters from the base. As Kim tries to pierce Lish contact, Richard rushes to the airlock. As he opens it, Marco collapses inside, revealing a gaping hole in his helmet. When Richard helps him remove the helmet, he recoils in horror. Marco's face is grotesquely altered, giving him the appearance of a zombie. Suddenly, Marco rises from the floor and lunges toward Richard, grabbing an electric drill from a nearby toolbox. In a horrifying moment, he pierced Richard in the gut, causing him to fall. Despite the searing pain, Richard manages to reach over and trigger the base alarm, alerting the others. Kim rushes toward the airlock but freezes when she spots Marco, whose face is now grotesquely altered. Overcome with fear, she bolts in the opposite direction, seeking refuge in a different room. As she hides, Lauren arrives at the airlock, also revealing signs of infection. Richard, barely holding on, stumbles into another room and locks the door behind him, desperately trying to keep the creatures out. Lauren, now fully overtaken by the infection, turns her attention to Kim, who is unarmed and untrained for combat. Kim fights back as best she can, using everything in the room as makeshift weapons. Marco soon joins Lauren, and together they advance toward Kim. In a frantic struggle, one of the creatures is distracted by a spilled liquid on the floor, giving Kim a brief moment to knock the other one down and make her escape. She locks the door behind her and bolts towards safety. Meanwhile, Richard, in his last moments of consciousness, manages to mutter a distress call over the radio, Mayday. The rest of the team arrives back at the base, with Charles ordering the crew to wait outside as he investigates the situation. Inside, he finds utter chaos. As Marco begins smashing through a glass door, Charles tells Kim to suit up while he fends off the creatures. Kim manages to don her suit just as Marco breaks free. Charles attempts to reason with Marco, but the infection has destroyed any semblance of humanity in him. Realizing words won't work, Charles rushes to the airlock, but not before Marco and Lauren catch up and pierced him in the shoulder. After a brief struggle, Charles escapes the base, reuniting with the crew outside. They seal the airlock, trapping the infected astronauts inside. Vincent, shaken by the encounter, protests about leaving their former crewmates behind, but Kim coldly points out that they are no longer human. Seeking refuge, the crew retreats to the greenhouse dome, where Rebecca begins treating Charles's wound. Though she lacks medical training, she does her best to stabilize him. As Charles weakens, he expresses his sorrow, unable to recall what his family looks like. With his last bit of strength, he asks the crew to pass on his love to his family. Suddenly, Charles snaps and grabs Robert by the neck, forcing the others to intervene. Vincent, desperate and panicked, restrains Charles, but as the infected man gasps for breath, he tells them they'll never make it home. Moments later, Charles passes out. Fearing he'll reanimate like Marco and Lauren, Kim ties him to a table while Vincent covers the body with a blanket, visibly shaken. The crew debates their next move when they hear an explosion from outside. The infected astronauts have escaped, blowing open the airlock. As they begin pounding on the dome's doors, Charles's body jerks violently under the blanket, but soon goes still again. The crew needs to contact the space station, but the comms are down. Vincent volunteers to crawl through the oxygen pipe to the base to repair the system. Rebecca, fearing Charles might reanimate, takes a blood sample and discovers the infection is spreading rapidly. As Vincent crawls through the tight passageway, he suffers a panic harm, haunted by memories of a past accident aboard the Aurora. Rebecca manages to calm him over the radio, reassuring him that the entire team is terrified, just like he is. Once Vincent reaches the base, he finds blood splattered everywhere, but quickly sets to work repairing the communication system. Meanwhile, Rebecca injects Charles with a solution of antibiotics, hoping it might slow the infection. Charles's body convulses violently, leading Rebecca to believe the antibiotics are working, but Kim argues that the movements are just natural bodily reflexes. When the convulsions stop, Rebecca takes another blood sample and realizes the bacteria are no longer multiplying. Though the solution isn't a cure, it has at least slowed the infection's progression. Kim suggests they weaponize the solution by using it as a decontamination spray. Vincent successfully contacts the Aurora, but before he can explain the situation, the power shuts off again. Robert monitors the infected astronauts' movements and notices they are heading back to the base after failing to break through the dome doors. The crew devises a plan: lure the creatures to the airlock and spray them with the antibiotic solution. As one of the infected astronauts enters, the decontamination spray activates, and the creature writhes on the ground, incapacitated. Unfortunately, Rebecca soon discovers that the bacteria have started to develop resistance, making the effect temporary. Vincent, still trying to restore power, encounters an infected Richard. Without hesitation, he bashes Richard repeatedly with his flashlight, but the creature refuses to stay down. Vincent flees back through the oxygen pipe, leaving the base in disarray once more. The crew realizes they are running out of options, and the infection is evolving faster than they can combat it. In the tense moments after reaching the panel, Vincent urgently instructs Rebecca to open it, warning her that he hadn't sealed the other end of the oxygen pipe. As they pull him out, the crew quickly dons their helmets while Kim hurls 2 bottles of antibiotics at the infected Richard, but the harm has little effect. In a panic, Vincent and Rebecca race to open the airlock, hoping to escape the chaos inside. Suddenly, Robert notices Charles's body starting to reanimate, and without hesitation, he flees, locking the door behind him, leaving Kim to face the infected alone. When Robert catches up to Vincent and Rebecca, he coldly tells them that Kim didn't survive. In the airlock, the creature they had sprayed earlier begins stirring, prompting Robert to unleash a few furious kicks before the trio manages to escape. As they make their way out, an infected former crew member pierced Rebecca in the leg with a pair of scissors. Despite the injury, the team makes it to the rover, and Vincent quickly injects Rebecca with antibiotics, hoping to stave off the infection. As they drive away, it dawns on them that they don't have enough power to reach the landing site. With Rebecca unable to walk due to her wound, Vincent suggests returning to the base for treatment, but Robert argues she should be left behind because she's already infected. In a tense exchange, Rebecca reminds Robert that he, too, might be infected, as Charles had grabbed him by the neck, but Robert avoids the accusation by shifting the conversation. He recalls there's another rover at the excavation site, and they change course. Once they reach the site, Robert ventures to the other rover on foot. Over the radio, he tells Vincent to leave Rebecca behind, but Vincent refuses. Robert abandons them and drives off alone. By the time Vincent tries to stop him, it's too late. As if things couldn't get worse, Vincent realizes the infected creatures have been following them and are closing in. Desperate, he and Rebecca drive through the raging sandstorm in a last-ditch effort to lose their pursuers. Vincent calculates that the rover's solar-powered batteries will recharge by morning, giving them just enough power to reach the landing site. As dawn breaks, Vincent awakens to a message from the space station. A rescue team is en route. He tries to respond, but the communication is too garbled due to interference. Then he realizes something else Rebecca is missing. Panicked, he follows her footprints in the sand and eventually finds her, but Rebecca tells him to stay away, explaining that she feels the infection taking over her body. Determined to save her, Vincent ignores her warnings and rushes toward her. In a heartbreaking moment, Rebecca removes her helmet, knowing it will end her life quickly, and dies from suffocation. Just minutes later, Rebecca's body reanimates and attacks Vincent, forcing him into a brutal fight to restrain her. Rebecca, barely conscious of her actions, pleads for Vincent to end her suffering. In a tearful moment of mercy, Vincent grabs a rock and strikes her, putting an end to her struggle. He sits there for a moment, grieving the loss, before looking up to see the aurora approaching in the distance. Vincent races to the landing site, but to his horror, 3 of the infected creatures are also heading toward the spacecraft. He tries to warn the aurora not to open the hatch, but the interference from the storm prevents the message from getting through. As the rescue team disembarks, the creatures ambush them, and their blood-curdling screams echo through Vincent's radio. Cautiously, Vincent approaches the ship and finds the creatures feasting on the remains of the rescue team. To his relief, they don't notice him. Inside the ship, he stumbles upon Robert in the cockpit. Though Robert is still conscious, it's clear that the infection has begun to take hold of him. Vincent, knowing the risk of bringing the bacteria back to Earth, confronts Robert, and the two engage in a vicious fight. During the struggle, Robert pierced S. Vincent's helmet, damaging it. As the ship begins to lift off, shaking violently from autopilot, Vincent headbutts Robert repeatedly until Robert collapses, seemingly lifeless. Exhausted, Vincent removes his blood-stained helmet and opens the hatch, sending Robert's body floating into space. In the few seconds of exposure, Vincent struggles to breathe and experiences a vivid hallucination of Rebecca, comforting him in his final moments. After sealing the hatch, Vincent sends a message to the space station detailing the tragic events that unfolded. Realizing there's a chance he could also be infected, Vincent outlines his plan. If he notices any symptoms of infection, he will crash the ship into Mars, unaliving himself to prevent the spread of the bacteria to Earth. As the Aurora continues its flight, Vincent waits for a response, prepared for whatever comes next. And that concludes our intense journey through the harrowing events of the Tantalus base on Mars. What started as a routine mission for these astronauts quickly spiraled into a terrifying fight for survival against an unknown infection. The story's deep exploration of human resilience, the cost of scientific discovery, and the moral dilemmas faced in life-or-death situations leaves us questioning how far we'd go to save humanity or ourselves. If you're a fan of edge-of-your-seat suspense, eerie atmospheres, and complex character dynamics, this is definitely one to watch. What did you think of the movie? Would you have made the same choices as Vincent, or do you think there was another way? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more thrilling reviews. Until next time, keep exploring the unknown, just maybe not on Mars.